Mind Power workshop this Saturday at the Yoga Center. My other hat is a lot of my activism involves around books. So I helped build the Women's Studies program at Chico State, was the longest serving coordinator of Women's Studies. And then always I'm interested in the underrepresented, the underdog. And after that period of my life, I spent the last 15 years researching youth activism and youth values. And I was really surprised to find that even in supportive books about youth, they didn't include their voice. So they talked about youth, but they didn't talk with them. And so I wrote a book called Ageism in Youth Studies, A Generation Maligned. And for this semester coming up, I still think semesters, I'm working on a book called Resist, Goals and Tactics for Changemakers. And I invite listeners to critique and read chapters because it's in draft form. So some classes around the country are going to read it, and I'm really looking forward to their critiques. And I just would like to say that we also appreciate Steve Tchudi as all the work that you do at the Peace and Justice Center, editing the newsletter, and your work is really a valuable contribution to the community. So thanks to you.
Well, thank you very much.
You're here.
I tend to be a typewriter activist or a web activist, so that's why you three are really on the front lines also. So I'm very eager to hear about that because, I often say, oh, well, I sit there at the typewriter, but where is that getting us? And Gayle, we want to talk some more before the evening is over about your book, the Strategies for Change book, particularly the chapters, and toward the close you get into some very specific strategies, but you also have lots of anecdotes that you've gathered around the world. And I remember from our trip to India, you were interviewing kids when we visited schools. Gayle would head off and interview kids and capture their voices.
It was so funny. Our guide, who was a Sikh man, whenever we'd see teenagers, he'd go, "Global youth." And we'd make a beeline and go talk to the global youth. It was really cute.
I just want to say, listeners, if you have questions for any of my guests this evening, I would invite you to send me a text at 530-781-4676. And as the evening progresses, if some texts come in with specific questions for Gayle, Aramenta, and Pamm, we'll put those forward. Let me turn to Aramenta Hawkins. It's my pleasure to work with her. I'm on the board of directors of the Chico Peace and Justice Center, so I get a chance to watch her amazing work, highly energetic. Aramenta was raised in Southern California, where she was involved in creating outreach programs for inner city youth of Los Angeles through her family's nonprofit organization, Sports Spectacular. Later, Aramenta attended Chico State while serving the community of Butte County as a California Department of Forestry firefighter and first responder. And after she received a BA in Organizational Communications from CSU Chico, she worked as a coordinator for several local grassroots organizations, including Frack Free Butte County, which was highly successful in getting frack freeness on the ballot.
Yeah, it was nice to be a part of that.
Yeah, it was great. Welcome, Aramenta.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate you inviting me here. Especially during this time when we need activists on the streets, talking to their neighbors and friends, and also being allowed to put on programs and events at the center that will help educate our public, the Butte County residents and beyond, and to bring her closer together. My thing is all about community building. That's what I'm focused on. I think that's the key, or one of the keys, one of the important keys to help Butte County through this time, and then also help other people through this time as well, other counties and communities as well. So I think communication and face-to-face, doing joint work with other groups who are already doing things that we need to be involved in as well, not only in this community but outside. So it's funny that you say we're talking about youth, because that's what my family's nonprofit organization was all about, really communicating to the youth motivating them and also learning from them, not just, directing them, but getting direction from them. I think that's very important, especially as activists, because we don't know everything and we don't know everybody. Sometimes we seem like we do, but we have specific things that we need to learn from our youth, and I think that's very important. And so I'm very gracious that the people here understand that and are doing work, connecting.
Yes, we'll talk a little bit later about potential ageism, and one of our ongoing concerns at the Peace Center is the next generation of peacemakers. How to get
not only the next generation, but new activists.
New activists.
Right, new activists, because there are people who are older that understand now, probably are waking up because of viral videos, and then they're watching alternative sources of information as far as getting the news. And so they're starting to wake up, and they are starting to be really affected by what's going on directly in their neighborhoods, in their jobs. And also, when they're relaxing or whatever, you can't get away from what's going on right now. And I think a lot of people are motivated to do something, and it's nice to have CPJC be one of those resources that they can go to.
Right. Could you talk a little bit about your work this past year? You brought in several new community partners to the center. How do you approach that? How do you bring them in?
It's interesting at the center because we are downtown, and so we pretty much the social issues that are going on in the world right now are at our door, especially downtown, with the homeless population, people without roofs, the frantic misunderstanding about race relations and what's going on in Butte County as that, as well as gender relations as well. People are, it seems like they come to our door, and actually we get to experience what's going on, really what's happening in the nation, because it's at our door. The plaza, we're directly across from the plaza, so we see a lot of interactions with the police and how it affects the downtown businesses. And so I think communication is the key, and also it also births new ideas and people wanting to start new chapters in different grassroots organizations. So like Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is a nationwide organization that has a chapter in Chico, but also it was a lot of people who are already working at CPJC who started that, who brought who brought that chapter here, developed that chapter, and they work they're just local residents, activists, and some of them are working at Chico State and other organizations. So I get to work with all these people, and I interact with a lot of them. So I kind of know what's coming up the pike. And so it's like, well, we have resources too. Let's get together and do a little bit of community building, bringing in organizations like Love Chapman Town, which you are a part of. Doing joint, more cross-pollinating with them and with the organization, because they do great work too, and they have special niches that they like to that's important to them as far as their mission. So it's bringing those organizations who are already doing work and who are being developed into the center, like Showing Up for Racial Justice, and then also. We have ongoing organizations as well, like MLK Unity, who's having an event in January about Martin Luther King, and then also organizations that people might not necessarily think would be, part of a social justice area or organizations such as Chico Velo, who deals with alternatives transportation. That's very important to the environment, and it has a lot to do with the peace movement as well. And anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Go ahead.
We're going to pick up on all of those too as we talk about what's needed to be done around the community. But it does hit on a thing that has been a personal concern of mine for a long time. We need in Chico, I think, common denominator organizations. We have so many progressive groups out there doing great work, but we know funding is scarce these days.
Funding is very scarce.
Sometimes we're in competition with one another.
This is a small town.
I shudder to think of the number of dinners and silent auctions
and fundraisers and special events and and I believe that we all need to know really get to know each other, because we're just most of us are located downtown, these obscure buildings, right. And it'd be nice to understand where everybody is, what their general mission is, and what they're doing, so we can help each other. Because I think it's a stronger voice that way, and it's more impactful if we do things together than separately.
Absolutely. Let me turn to Pamm Larry. Pamm has didn't know this until I looked it up, a BA in Religious Studies and a particular interest in ethical theology. We won't ask her to discourse too much on ethical theology tonight. Rather, we see it in her work. Growing up, she spent a lot of time on her grandparents' farm in Creston, Iowa, and that's where she first connected with land and became deeply interested in agricultural issues. In Chico, she had a career as a midwife and as a business owner. Most recently, she was the spark plug in the Labeled GMOs movement, fighting for labeling of GMO ingredients on the food that we consume. And that has had powerful influence not only in California but nationwide. She's continuing her fight against GMOs and what we call the Monsanto empire. But she's recently joined the Good Food Brigade movement, looking specifically for safe, local, tasty food. And typical for Pamm, she's planning to travel, and we want to hear a little bit more about her plans to hit the road in coming months. Welcome, Pamm Larry.
Hi, thanks for having me on, Steve. Really appreciate it, and being among these women who I admire so much. I just drove in from Sacramento today. The groups that worked on genetically engineered labeling are working on banning Roundup/glyphosate in California. The genetically engineered food movement, the food movement in general, has been kind of quiet ever since last year, when our movement was kind of shut down with what we call the DARK Act. But I took a little time and I regrouped, and I realized that it was really important to me to continue working on food issues. So last year we started reaching out to different folks providing food services in Butte County, and have evolved into a group called the Butte County Good Food Network. And we are here to create a strong local food system that's based on good food, which we defined as just, resilient, regenerative, healthy, and tasty. And so we had our inaugural event in October, which was a short film festival. And we have our next event, which is in February. It's a farm to fork brunch, Sunday brunch, to connect people with their farmers, the people who are feeding us. Now, on the face of this, many believe that the local food movement to be kind of like a hipster, groovy thing. But what they don't understand is that it's vital for our survival in the future. There are all sorts of reasons why our food system is very, very fragile, and that if we focus on creating strong local food systems, we have a much better chance of surviving, number one. But it also creates community. It bridges gaps. It's about, everybody eats, so who cares if you're a Democrat or Republican? If you can avoid talking about those things, it's a tremendous community builder. We have a huge agricultural community. We are an agricultural area. And so creating outreach and connecting with our farmers, who will be the people who help us survive in the coming years, if what I'm hearing about climate change is actually true. It's still a bunch of models and stuff like that, that we're basing our understanding of what's going on with the planet. But for instance, just yesterday I found out that on January 1st, we had a huge methane burst in the Arctic Circle. And so there are a lot of things that are happening on the planet. Agriculture contributes 51% of all greenhouse gases. And so I work on food issues because I see them at a core, even though we still have food in our grocery stores. And we still have food in a lot of ways, so people don't really focus on it as an important, vital issue. But that issue is teetering. Yeah. And in so many ways. So this is why I push it, and it's about our survival. So my plans are locally to continue to work with the Good Food Network. And to be a driving force in it. We're going to be having a local food week in October to encourage people to buy more of their foods from our farmers locally, to create more of a demand for that so that we encourage more farmers, but also to reach out to those who don't know about farming, what our farmers market has to offer that have a misconception, and to bring more people into the fold. So that's really important, but also nationally, so the local group is called the Butte County Good Food Network, and then nationally, I have been launching the Good Food Brigade. The Good Food Brigade is basically what we're doing here locally, but expanded out into the nation. So I recently purchased a Farron Telstar RV, and I'm going to be using it to travel across the country, coming back here from time to make sure I'm connected with my community and keep that going. But to interview people and to rabble-rouse like I did in Prop 37, to one of our main initiatives is we're calling it Victory Gardens 2.0. So encouraging people to go to the Good Food Brigade and register their personal gardens, their community gardens, their CSAs, their farms, to show unity. You know, we used to to produce 42% of our produce here in this country during World War II, and I would like to see us do the same thing, but to do it with peace, love, and unity and connection. So that's what that's all about. So yeah, I'm really excited about this project, and every time I talk about it with folks, they get really jazzed and pumped too. So I'm excited. Yeah, and it's working, and it's just fun.
Great. We've sort of set the table. We'll take a brief music break and then come back to talk, kind of a panel discussion about your views of activism. I did want to build on one thing you said, Pam. A week from Tuesday on the Ecotopia show, Susan and I will be interviewing. This is The Real Issue on KZFR 90.1. I'm Stephen Tchudi, sitting in for Sue Hildebrand. My guests tonight are Gayle Kimball, Aramenta Hawkins, and Pamm Larry. If you have questions for them about activism or issues here in Chico, do send me a text. The number is 530-781-4676. Well, in this segment, I'd like to ask you about activist strategies. What can individuals and groups do to bring about New Year's revolutions? I sense that there's a great deal of pessimism and discouragement among activists. At the same time, there's a great resurgence of energy recently. People getting it together saying we really have to act at this point. Let's start locally. What do you see as some of the biggest issues facing us in Chico and the North State, and what sorts of activism do you see as being important in this time?
I'd like to say that I think Trump does us a service in bringing to the light racism, sexism, classism, the despair of the blue-collar, uneducated worker who voted for him because their job is lost. So in a negative kind of way, I think he can be really healing for our country. Mm-hmm. And I think all the polls show the Democrats are going to take the House, maybe even the Senate, and that his advisors have told Trump that they'll probably impeach you if that happens. Mm-hmm. So I think there's some exciting things happening. I'm really influenced by Indivisible, and as if listeners don't know, Indivisible was a pamphlet, and then it was a surprise hit. It was written by former staffers, young staffers in Congress, and they studied the Tea Party. And what they realized that what makes for success is you got to jam your local member of Congress. Mm-hmm. So that is my goal for 2018, is coming up with a realistic opponent to LaMalfa. Because someone who says, I think climate changes, ha ha ha, as if climate change, which is threatening our planet, is a joke. Just like Trump joked about, let's send some global warming to the East Coast. Anybody who could joke about such a tragedy is like making a joke at a funeral. Mm-hmm. So that's my priority. Mm-hmm.
Aramenta?
There's a couple of things. One of my priorities is talking to, and we discuss new activists. People who don't necessarily want to or haven't been involved in politics, local politics at all, but because of this resurgence of what's going on and how different people are affected, they do want to now be involved in their local community. Also, talking about new activists, I also want to reach the college students who don't believe that this community is their community because they live elsewhere. But, I want to focus on bringing them off of campus and immersing them in our community, and really understanding what really goes on here is a deep history of activism, and they can be a part of that. There's not one way to be an activist. I know a lot of people think that demonstrating in the streets, that's part of it. A lot of new activists like to do their thing online. That's the way they do it. They sign petitions online. They organize online. A lot of things are happening on the internet. A lot of things are tapping into people's emotionally because of online video. You can see interactions you can see interactions with certain demographics you probably wouldn't know about at all, and how they are affected and what they're going through. So my thing is connecting with new activists and helping them understand that this is their community and they need to be involved in local politics. It's pretty simple. We have city council meetings weekly, correct? Like every Tuesday, I believe. And so you can go there and let your voice be heard. And also, if you don't want to do that, we have technology now that you can start your own revolution in your room, in your dorm room.
I want to go in two directions here. One is city council, the other is electronics and social media. You've spoken before city council on several occasions.
Yes.
What's your sense? Are they paying attention when you give them a legitimate earful?
Well, it's hard for me to try to interpret what they're thinking.
Yes.
I don't have that kind of power. I would like to, but I think when they see people actually showing up, that they haven't. People who don't really connect that way politically, where they're bringing their kids to city council meetings and they're packing the room. I think that's when you get the ear of the people with the power, because they see that actually. When groups of people show up, people have to pay attention, and that's all I'm going to say.
It's true.
Pamm?
So I would like to say that to echo a lot of what you're saying, that there are tons of ways to do activism. I think one of the things that happens is that there's so much, we're barraged by so much of the distractive stuff, tweets, this going on, that going on. We don't know what's real anymore because we don't know what's real news on the places that we choose to find our news. It's to find the place where we feel our most passionate. I love that you're doing all sorts of stuff with the area with the youth and the homeless and stuff, because I know it's being covered, so I can focus on food issues. We've all got our places and our spaces, and I think it's just I think many people are feeling overwhelmed. The past couple of years have been really traumatic, I think, to our souls and to our deep inner beings, and it's very difficult not to feel like we're in PTSD half of the time. But it's to pick one thing or maybe two that we feel acutely passionate about and focus on that area, not to the exclusion of everyone else, because we need to stick together and support each other when it's important, like showing up for city council meetings or going to election things and stuff like that. But to really, really find our place in our space and then to act. Whether it's, like, I would love it if people would work on food issues. I mean, it's an easy one to work on, even if you can't go to meetings or city council meetings or anything. Every time we spend $1 on food or clothing or plastics or whatever, we are creating a different world. We are creating the world in the future, whether it's buying into the corporate structure that is polluting our minds and our planet, or we are creating a new world. So just being really conscious about that. But also becoming involved with groups. Go to the Chico Peace and Justice Center and do some of the events that are going on there. Join us at our brunch. Come to our meetings with the Butte County Good Food Network. Shop at the farmers market. Whatever you do, but start to look at yourself as a change agent instead of just a consumer. That what you are doing is really, really important. I also wanted to really give a shout out. We have an opportunity coming up in our Butte County elections with both Deborah Lucero and Tammy Ritter. They are going to need a lot of help getting elected, and we are at a crossroads with our Board of Supervisors that we can really make a huge change. They're running for office in a time where progressives don't show up historically at the box office, and all we have to do is just show up and vote. I've also just learned, that there is going to be an event at the Chico Women's Club on January 27th at 1 p.m. that there's going to be music for the first half, and then you get to get introduced to the candidates that are potentially running against La Malfa, and the people that are running that show many of the values that people at KZFR stand for. So just wanted to, it's about the macro and the micro. It's about us, being responsible consumers, quote unquote, or buyers or eaters or whatever we are, and then also paying attention to what's going on in our elected arena.
I'd like to zero in on some of the micros a little bit. What I'm hearing in part, you're saying just showing up is important, and there are a number of ways we can show up. We've also sort of touched on the topic of social media, electronic media, and the effectiveness there. Here, I can play the role of a curmudgeon. I'm not on Facebook. Drives me crazy. Too much stuff. I know that Facebook gets a lot of credit for sending out its messages. At the same time, there has been some research that says it's kind of fragmented. People kind of throw up stuff on Facebook. Pam, go ahead.
Yeah. So one thing that's really important for people to understand is Facebook is not what Facebook used to be. I have, becoming more involved in that, I have said more than once that if Facebook had been what it was back in 2011, Prop 37 would have never happened. There's much more control. The algorithms are much more, especially since the last election, they are cutting out anything controversial, and they literally, when you have friends, only 5 to 10% of the people that are your friends get to see your posts. So it's really difficult right now to get true activism going on via Facebook. I'm not saying that we, as activists, we can ignore Facebook, but that it's really important to understand. Twitter, I hate Twitter, but Twitter is much more of a neutral zone. But I believe the gift about this is that I believe that really the true change comes from personal interaction. When we're looking into each other's eyes and feeling each other's hearts in person, that true change happens. So maybe that's why the push is happening this way.
What I've learned from research, like the youth-led revolutions, they overturned Mubarak in Egypt in 18 days using social media and being on the street. But where they failed is they didn't have a visionary plan in place and a unified substitute to fill the vacuum. So what I'm hearing is that Democrats, progressives need a vision. They need a plan. They need a plan. They need a plan. They need something that is coherent and provides an alternative to neoliberal capitalism and the growing inequality in an era when 8 men own as much as half the world's population. And then what I'm also reading is that, like Doug Jones' victory in Alabama, they made thousands of phone calls. They went door to door. They got out the vote. And there are other situations like that in Virginia where unknowns won the House of Delegates, and they telephoned. They knocked at the door. So it seems like what really involves someone is what Pam said, eyeball to eyeball. And personal stories, personal contact. The Obama Foundation says that too. You got to meet the people. So just a petition obviously is not going to make radical change.
Right.
I think it can be a combination of everything.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be one thing. We could pound the streets, we could do face-to-face, but also we need to really understand the way other people communicate and use those tools together to be more impactful. It doesn't have to be just one thing. It could be a combination of all 3 things that we're doing to be more impactful. And social media can be a great gift. It's just the way you use it. It's the way the person, the group uses it. Social media is very valuable.
And you've done a lot of the pieces.
Protests can be formed in a minute on the street, especially with the youth and the new
Well, we're seeing
activists.
in Iran as we speak.
Exactly.
Social media being very effective in getting word about the protest out to the rest of the world.
But we're also seeing the Russians use millions of bot posts to influence the U.S. election in 2016. So it's a mixed blessing.
What about education? A lot of talk about, I've talked with middle school kids because we hear that kids are vulnerable to that kind of work. When I've talked to middle school kids, I say, are you really being victimized by media? Can't you critically tell when you're getting real stuff and fake stuff? Most of them, they seem to me, are pretty well alert. But clearly, the kind of thing we've been talking about here, the negative campaigning, the bots and so forth, worked with a huge percentage of Americans. Are there educational routes where we could sharpen people's critical awareness of what's coming over, help them sort through the social blitz, the tweets from Trumpville and so forth?
I haven't heard of classes like that in schools, but obviously we need them now. Critical thinking, evidence, what's proof. Trump lies 5.6 times a day. How do you teach kids to figure out what's truth and what's the lie?
I think it's very, very tricksy, though. Very tricksy, because then who's the arbiter of what is the truth? And I can tell you from working on food issues and water issues and a lot of different things, but mostly food issues, that the science that's presented, which is not science at all, it is hysterical baloney. But because they have enough money, they can make it seem like it's the truth. It's that whole thing the Bernays said, just tell the lie enough times and it becomes the truth. So I think that that's a very tricksy, slippery slope that we have to be very, very careful about.
It's also very tricky for the teachers. George Will in the Enterprise Record on Sunday was talking about what he calls the rot in academia, which he takes to be the liberals who are converting innocent college students to left-wing ways. If a teacher does try to teach critical thinking, it's really tough for that teacher to remain neutral. And as Aristotle said, I'm not sure I believe it anymore, but Aristotle said truth is always more powerful than lies. If you give people a chance to evaluate, they will recognize the truth and do away with the lies.
It is so tricky, though, because I can tell you, because I know that many universities have been taken over by corporations. So when they get their endowments, like for instance at Berkeley, when they get their large endowments, then the corporations want to have control of the curriculum. So it's, because I've talked to professors there, so that is again a very, very tricky balance, and I think a lot of it has to do with the divisiveness that's going on, where there's such a distrust of anything that counters what we personally think about. We've lost the art of communication and being able to really hear each other instead of looking at each other and demonizing each other. And I think our society is really losing a lot in that dichotomy. But it's difficult. I don't know how we're going to get out of it, because it just seems to become more entrenched.
It's Fox versus MSNBC
Exactly.
and CNN.
And I don't believe either one of them.
Well, on Ecotopia, we interviewed a guy whose name I can't come up with. He's up in British Columbia, wrote a book called I'm Right and You're an Idiot. And he talked that logic and evidence isn't as persuasive as it used to be. It's narratives, that you got to change the narrative, change the story that people tell. Because, he says, you're persuaded when people tell you your story, so you want to hear it. And the Trump people, of course, were very successful at that, especially with blue-collar workers, job loss, and so forth, of telling that narrative that it was Democrats' fault that it all fell apart, and here we go.
I would tend to agree with George Lakoff, though, from Berkeley, who would say that it's not that the Trump administration fooled its people, but that rather that the progressives and the Democrats don't have a clear vision based on values that they're able to communicate. And the communication that we're getting is that of neoliberalism. And so people are alienating themselves from the Progressive and the Democratic Party because of it. So I think that,
And Lakoff would talk about it in terms of dominant metaphors, that the metaphors we live by, and very difficult to get people to change those metaphors or those narratives. I want to talk, could we expand it out a little bit? What do you see as the major issues in California and beyond? And are there things that people in Chicoland can be doing to influence it? So what are those big issues, and what might we be doing in coming months?
To me, the big issue everywhere is climate change. Because if we trash the planet, what are we talking about? And I'm impressed that Jerry Brown is organizing a global climate change conference in the fall. So to me, anything that makes us be a leader in addressing the environmental problem is top of my list. So go, Jerry.
I think one of the big issues as well is race relations. We're still dealing with that. We're still not having open, honest conversations. People are still believing in stereotypes. We're still a divided country. We're still a divided county. I think discussion needs to be at hand, open, honest discussion, and to help people become more aware of other people's experiences, because most people believe in their own experiences. They don't understand what other people are dealing with. So I think that's a major topic as well, race relations.
And you're working on a program, Whose Lives Matter?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'm working on. One is we did a pilot program of Whose Lives Matter, which really delves into that topic of, really having discuss race in the related history, our history, and what race has to do with that. Mm-hmm. And then actually talking about, actually how to understand how other people are affected because of that, because of our racist history and the white supremacy. And then also, when they get educated, understanding like how do they go about that, with this new awareness, where should they go, and how they can educate others, especially in their families and co-workers. So I think that's a major issue as well. It comes up yearly. A lot of people now are more aware because of social media, because of technology. You have a camera on your phone. Mm-hmm. It's easy to get access to what's going on in other parts of the world, but also in this country. So, yeah.
Okay. Pamm, you've stumped the state. I mean, that's been your mode of operation.
Yeah, so I would say that these two are primary, and that that both the race relations and the climate, and I think they're connected. Mm-hmm. I think that I firmly believe that, if we look out at the world, it's the folks that are non-white that are being most impacted by the climate.
Around the world.
Around the world, around the planet, and in our own state. The places that are sprayed the most with, lethal, toxic poisons are areas where are primarily Latino, where, it's everywhere. And I think that if we acknowledge all the different interconnections and we start coming together more, it's all about unity. And I like to always refer to the mycorrhiza fungi, which are the little things underneath the ground that where plants communicate to each other. I believe we as humans are the above ground mycorrhiza fungi, and that just as the mycorrhiza fungi can sequester a lot of the carbon and create healthy soils, and so make so that the water stays, we've just got huge issues going on, and we're running out of time. Mm-hmm. We're running out of time. That methane burst that was measured, I don't know, is that the beginning of like what I'm starting to call the old phase, the old shit phase, basically. And we've got to overcome these things that are just like are stupid things to have to be focusing on. I'm just in terms of why are we even having to think about this stuff? It's just like, why do we care if a man and a man love each other? Like, why do we care? It's none of our business. Why are we creating these divisions among our races when we've got this bigger issue going on that is about our survival as a species? The Earth will remain. It's just, will we be here? Will our grandchildren be here? And yes, we're all going to die and yada, 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 yada. But, it's, I think that, what's the thing? I've always thought that our greatest blocks are our biggest treasures. That once we get past them, they prove to be like the thing that heals everything. And I think that I'm really trying to push that. I'm trying to talk about deeper spiritual topics, because that's all we have left right now, because that's where we are. We have to go deeper. We have to go deeper than, you're a Trump supporter and you were a Hillary supporter. We have to go deeper than all the different things that we're distracted by, just tweets. Just don't even read them. Like, don't have anything to do with them. He's an idiot. Like, why are we focusing on him? You know what I mean? And